My first encounter with terror came while fighting beside Earth's warriors. Part 1. Al had spent his entire life studying other species from the safety of books and recordings. He was a scholar of the people, a race known across the galaxy for their wisdom and their complete rejection of violence. His kind had not fought a war in 12,000 years. They had no need for such things. Every conflict could be solved with words, with patience, with understanding. This was what Al believed with all his heart when he first arrived at Harmony's Edge. The research station floated near the border of disputed space, a place where many species came together to share knowledge and build friendships. Al had requested this posting because he wanted to study humans up close. They were a young species, barely a few centuries into space travel, but they had already made a name for themselves. Some called them brave, others called them reckless. A few whispered that they were dangerous. Al wanted to understand which of these things was true. He found humans confusing at first. They laughed too loud. They ate foods that smelled strange. They touched each other constantly, slapping backs and gripping hands and bumping shoulders. They considered such contact impolite, but humans seemed to need it like they needed air. Lieutenant Amy Dawson was the first human to truly speak with him. She was a security officer, a job that Al found both fascinating and disturbing. Her entire purpose was to prepare for violence that might never come. She carried a weapon at her hip at all times, even during meals, even during rest periods. When Al asked her why, she had smiled and said that trouble rarely sent warnings before it arrived. Amy was patient with his questions. She explained human concepts that had no equivalent in the language. Words like protectiveness, which meant the desire to keep others safe even at cost to oneself. Words like loyalty, which meant standing beside someone even when standing alone would be easier. Al wrote these definitions in his research journal, but he did not truly understand them. They seemed like nice ideas, nothing more. Commander Cole led the human contingent on Harmony's Edge. There were only 15 humans among the 300 beings on the station, but Cole acted as if he was responsible for everyone. He ran security drills that the other species found annoying. He checked emergency systems that had never been used. He studied maps of the station's corridors late into the night, planning escape routes for disasters that existed only in his imagination. Al observed Cole during one of these planning sessions and asked him why he worked so hard on problems that did not exist. Cole had looked at him with eyes that seemed older than his face and said that the problems always existed. The only question was whether you were ready when they finally showed themselves. This seemed like paranoia to Al. They had learned long ago that expecting trouble only invited it. Better to project peace and receive peace in return. He noted Cole's behavior as an example of human anxiety and moved on with his research. The days passed pleasantly enough. Al attended lectures and cultural exchanges. He sampled foods from 12 different worlds. He learned to play a human card game called poker, though he never understood why humans enjoyed lying to each other for entertainment. He began to think of Harmony's Edge as a second home. Then the warnings came. Al was in the observation lounge when the first alert sounded. The stars outside the window looked the same as always, peaceful and distant, but the faces around him had changed. The humans moved immediately, without hesitation, as if they had been waiting for this moment their entire lives. Other species looked confused, asking questions that no one answered. Amy found him in the crowd and gripped his arm. Her touch was firm but not painful. She told him to come with her, to move quickly, to stay close. He asked what was happening, and she said a single word that meant nothing to him at the time. The swarm was a name Al had heard in old stories, tales from the edges of known space where civilization grew thin. They were a hive species, creatures that moved in vast numbers and consumed everything in their path. They did not negotiate. They did not trade. They did not communicate except to coordinate their endless hunger. Some species had tried to reason with them over the centuries. Those species no longer existed. Al told Amy that surely there was some mistake. that had not been seen in this sector for decades. The coalition maintained patrols. There were warning systems and defensive grids and diplomatic channels. Someone would have known if the swarm was approaching. Amy did not argue with him. She simply pulled him along faster. Commander Cole had already gathered his people in the main security hub. Al watched as the 15 humans transformed from the laughing, casual creatures he had studied into something else entirely. Their faces went hard. Their movements became sharp and precise. They spoke in short sentences, confirming equipment and positions and ammunition counts. It was like watching a machine activate, cold and efficient and frightening. Other species began to arrive at the hub, seeking safety, seeking answers. A merchant demanded to know what was happening. A scientist insisted that someone contact the coalition fleet. A young diplomat named clung to Al and asked if they were going to die. Al did not know how to answer her. He had never considered the question before. Death was something that happened to other people, in other places, in stories that did not involve him. The idea that it might happen here now to him did not seem real. Cole addressed the room in a voice that carried without shouting. He explained that they had somehow bypassed the outer warning systems. A scout ship had detected their approach less than an hour ago. The station's long-range communications were being jammed. No help was coming, at least not soon. They needed to prepare for the possibility of a boarding action. The aliens in the room reacted with fear and confusion. Some wept. Some argued. Some simply stood frozen, unable to process what they were hearing. They had no instinct for this situation. Their evolution had never required them to face predators. They had only one response to danger: freeze and hope the threat passed them by. The humans did not freeze. They moved through the crowd, organizing groups, assigning tasks, calming those who would listen. Amy stayed beside Al and told him that everything would be okay. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to trust in her confidence. But her hands were checking her weapon as she spoke, and her eyes kept moving to the doors. The lights flickered once, twice, then shifted to emergency red. Somewhere in the distance, metal screamed as something tore through the outer hull. They had arrived, and Al was about to learn what terror truly meant. My first encounter with terror came while fighting beside Earth's warriors. Part 2. The first that Al saw was nothing like the images in the old records. Those pictures showed creatures from far away, small figures against the vastness of space, easy to dismiss as distant threats. This one was close enough to touch. It stood in the doorway of the corridor, its body hunched and twisted, covered in plates of dark shell that glistened under the emergency lights. Its head was long and narrow, filled with teeth that curved backward like hooks. 4 eyes scanned the room without blinking, seeing everything, calculating everything. Behind it came more. They poured through the breach in the hull like water through a broken dam, dozens of them, hundreds of them, an endless tide of hunger given form. The sound they made was not a roar or a screech but something worse, a clicking noise that came from deep in their throats, a sound of anticipation. Al could not move. His body refused to obey him. His hearts pounded so hard that he thought they might burst. His mind screamed at him to run, to hide, to do something, but his legs would not respond. This was the curse, the price they paid for their peaceful evolution. When danger came, they froze like prey animals hoping the predator would pass. The predator did not pass. The lead moved toward the group of aliens clustered near the security hub. The young diplomat stood closest to the door. She had not even turned around. She did not see the creature approaching until it was too late. They reached out with claws that were longer than knives and grabbed her by the shoulder. She screamed, a sound that Al would hear in his nightmares for the rest of his life. Then the screaming stopped. Al watched his fellow die. He watched her fall. He watched them begin to feed, and still he could not move. The humans moved. Commander Cole shouted something that Al did not understand, a word that sounded like a command and a curse combined. Then the humans opened fire. The sound was deafening, a storm of noise and light that filled the corridor. The lead jerked and fell, holes torn through its shell. More creatures climbed over its body, pushing forward, driven by hunger that knew no fear. Amy appeared beside Al and grabbed his arm. She pulled hard, dragging him backward, breaking whatever spell had frozen him in place. Her voice cut through the chaos, telling him to move, to stay behind her, to not look back. He obeyed because he did not know what else to do. They ran through corridors that had become nightmares. The emergency lights cast everything in shades of red, turning familiar paths into rivers of blood. Appeared from side passages and maintenance ducts, pouring into the station from multiple breach points. The humans fought them at every turn, firing and retreating, buying time with violence that Al had never imagined possible. A lunged from a doorway just ahead of them. Amy did not hesitate. She raised her weapon and fired 3 times, each shot finding its target. The creature fell at her feet, still twitching, still reaching for her with dying claws. She stepped over it and kept moving as if it was nothing, as if killing was as natural as breathing. Al asked her how she could do this. His voice shook so badly that he barely recognized it as his own. Amy glanced back at him, and for a moment he saw something in her eyes that surprised him. She was afraid. Her fear was real and deep and terrible, but she kept moving anyway. She kept fighting anyway. She told him that being scared and being stopped were 2 different things. Another came from behind. This one was faster than the others, or perhaps Amy was slower. She turned to face it, but the creature reached her first. Its claws raked across her side, tearing through her uniform, drawing blood that looked black in the red light. Amy made a sound of pain but did not fall. She jammed her weapon against the creature's throat and fired until it stopped moving. Al tried to help her, reaching out with hands that had never touched another being in anger. She pushed him away and told him to keep moving. The wound on her side was bleeding badly, soaking her uniform, dripping onto the floor, but she did not stop. She grabbed his arm again and pulled him forward, leaving a trail of red drops behind them. They reached a junction where other survivors had gathered. Commander Cole was there, along with 7 other humans and perhaps 40 aliens of various species. The aliens were huddled together, shaking, weeping, some of them praying in languages Al did not know. The humans stood in a loose circle around them, weapons raised, eyes watching every shadow. Cole saw Amy's wound and said nothing, but his jaw tightened. He asked if she could still fight. She nodded once and took a position in the defensive line. Al stood behind her, close enough to see the blood still flowing, close enough to hear her breathing grow heavier with each passing minute. He asked why she was doing this. Why did she keep fighting when she was hurt? Why did she put herself between danger and strangers? Why did any of them? Amy did not answer for a long moment. Then she said that humans were pack animals. They protected their pack, and right now, everyone on this station was part of her pack. Al did not understand. They had no such instinct. They valued individuals, not groups. They believed in self-preservation above all else. The idea of suffering for strangers made no sense to him. It was illogical. It was foolish. It was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. The clicking sounds grew louder. They were coming, drawn by the scent of blood and fear. Cole looked at his people and then at the frightened aliens they were protecting. He announced that they could not hold this position. The shuttle bay was 3 levels down. If they moved fast and stayed together, they might make it. Nobody asked about the alternative. Nobody needed to. The humans formed up around the civilians, placing themselves between the weak and the danger. Al found himself in the center of the group, surrounded by aliens who had never held weapons, who had never fought for anything, who had believed that the universe was fundamentally kind. That belief died tonight. Something else would need to take its place. They began to move through the corridors of the dying station, humans and aliens together, predator and prey united against a greater predator. And Al began to understand that he was witnessing something rare, something precious, something he would spend the rest of his life trying to explain. He was watching humans at war, and it was terrible, and it was glorious, and he could not look away. My first encounter with terror came while fighting beside Earth's warriors. Part 3. The maintenance corridors of Harmony's Edge were never meant for large groups. They were narrow and dark, filled with pipes and cables that hung from the ceiling like the roots of dead trees. The emergency lights here were dim, barely enough to see the person in front of you. The sounds of the echoed from every direction, clicks and scratches and the wet noise of feeding. Al stayed close to Amy. He watched her move through the darkness, weapon raised, eyes scanning every shadow. Her wound had stopped bleeding so heavily, but her face was pale and her breathing came in short gasps. She should have been resting. She should have been receiving medical care. Instead, she was leading a group of terrified aliens through a nightmare. The group moved slowly. 12 humans remained, spread out along the line of 43 civilians. Commander Cole led from the front, Specialist Danny guarded the rear. The other humans positioned themselves at regular intervals, creating a chain of protection that stretched through the corridor. Whenever it appeared, whichever human was closest dealt with it quickly and quietly. No panic, no hesitation, just the cold efficiency of beings who had trained their entire lives for moments like this. Al found himself walking beside Amy during a brief pause while Cole scouted ahead. He asked her about something he had noticed earlier. During the fighting, her hands shook whenever they were not holding her weapon, but the moment she raised the gun to fire, the shaking stopped completely. Her aim was steady. Her shots were precise. How was this possible? Amy looked at her hands as if seeing them for the first time. She explained that humans had evolved as both predator and prey. Their bodies prepared them for danger in strange ways. The shaking was fear trying to escape through her muscles. But when she focused on a target, when she had something to do, the fear became fuel instead of poison. She called it combat focus. She said all humans had it to some degree. Al asked if she was afraid right now. Amy laughed, though there was no humor in the sound. She told him that she was terrified. She had never been more scared in her entire life, but she was also determined. She was going to get these people to safety or die trying. There was no third option. This confused Al deeply. The concept of fear was different. When his people felt fear, they simply stopped functioning. Fear was the end of action, not the beginning. The idea that someone could feel terror and use it, could be afraid and brave at the same time, seemed like a contradiction. Amy shook her head. She said that courage was not the absence of fear. Courage was feeling the fear and doing what needed to be done anyway. Every human who had ever done something brave had been scared while doing it. That was what made it brave. They moved again, deeper into the maintenance level, closer to the shuttle bay. The clicking sounds grew louder and then softer and then louder again as patrols passed nearby. Once they had to press against the walls in complete silence, while a group of creatures moved through an intersection just meters away. Al could smell them, a sharp chemical odor that burned his nose. He could hear their claws scraping against the metal floor. He held his breath until his lungs screamed for air. Then Danny approached Commander Cole with news. He had scouted ahead and found a problem. A large group had gathered at the next junction, directly in their path. There was no way around them. They would have to fight through or find another route. Cole asked about other routes. Danny said there was one, but it would add an hour to their journey through sections that had already been breached. Many of the civilians would not survive that long. Some of them were already struggling to keep moving. Cole was quiet for a moment. Then he asked if there was a way to draw the away from the junction. Danny said yes, but someone would have to make a lot of noise and then run in the opposite direction. That would follow the noise. That someone would probably not come back. 2 more humans stepped forward before Cole could respond. Private Maria Santos was small but fierce, with quick eyes and quicker hands. Corporal Jake was her opposite, tall and steady, with a calm voice that never seemed to rise above a whisper. They both volunteered without being asked. Al did not understand what was happening. He asked Amy why they were volunteering for something that would kill them. She did not answer. Her eyes were fixed on her friends, and there was something in her expression that he could not read. Cole argued with them briefly. He said he could not order anyone to do this. Danny smiled and told him that no one was being ordered. They were choosing. There was a difference. Jake said that someone had to do it, and they had the best chance of surviving long enough to make a real diversion. Maria added that she had always wanted to be the hero of a story. Now was her chance. They said goodbye quickly. There was no time for long speeches or tearful farewells. Danny hugged Amy and whispered something in her ear. Jake shook Cole's hand with a grip that said everything words could not. Maria looked at the frightened aliens and told them to run fast when the way was clear. Then the three of them disappeared into the darkness. The group waited. Minutes passed like hours. Al listened to his own heartbeat and wondered if this was what humans felt before every battle. Then sounds erupted from somewhere ahead, gunfire and explosions and human voices shouting challenges. The clicking of the changed pitch becoming excited, eager. The sounds moved away from the junction, chasing the diversion. Cole gave the order to move. They ran as fast as the slowest member could manage, through the junction that was now empty past bodies of that the three humans had killed before leading the swarm away. The gunfire continued in the distance, growing fainter. Then it stopped. Amy wept as she ran. The tears flowed down her cheeks without sound, without slowing her pace. She did not wipe them away. She did not apologize for them. She simply let them fall while she kept moving forward, kept protecting the people around her, kept doing her job. Al asked if she was okay. It was a stupid question, and he knew at the moment the words left his mouth. She looked at him with red eyes and said that she was not okay. She would never be okay again, but she was still here, and that was enough. They kept moving through the corridors of the dying station, 9 humans now instead of 12, carrying the weight of sacrifice that Al was only beginning to understand. My first encounter with terror came while fighting beside Earth's warriors. Part 4. The shuttle bay doors were larger than Al remembered. They loomed in the emergency lighting like the gates of some ancient fortress, and dented but still standing. Commander Cole worked the manual controls while the rest of the group caught their breath. Some of the aliens had collapsed against the walls, too exhausted to stand. Others stared at nothing, their minds retreating from horrors they could not process. The doors opened with a grinding sound that made everyone flinch. Beyond them lay the shuttle bay, a vast space filled with shadows and the shapes of ships. Most of the shuttles had been destroyed during the initial attack, their hulls torn open like broken eggs. But 2 remained intact at the far end of the bay, their running lights blinking in the darkness. Cole sent 2 humans to check the shuttles while the rest secured the entrance. They returned with good news and bad news. The shuttles were functional. They had enough fuel and life support for the journey to the nearest coalition outpost. But they needed time to prep for launch, at least 15 minutes, maybe more. And the bay had multiple access points that could not all be sealed. Al did the mathematics in his head. 43 civilians, 2 shuttles, 9 humans. The civilians would fill both shuttles completely. There would be no room for the humans even if they wanted to leave, and they would reach the bay long before the shuttles could launch. He said this out loud, hoping someone would correct him. No one did. Cole gathered his people in a small circle near the bay entrance. They spoke quietly, using words that Al could not hear. Then they turned and faced the corridor they had just come through. They spread out in a line that blocked the passage completely, shoulder to shoulder, weapon to weapon. 9 humans against the entire swarm. Al approached Cole and asked what he was doing. The commander looked at him with eyes that held no fear, no regret, no uncertainty. He said that the civilians needed time. His people would give them that time. It was simple. But the mathematics did not work. Al explained this carefully as if Cole might not understand. 9 humans could not hold back the swarm for 15 minutes. They would be overwhelmed. They would die, all of them. Cole smiled. It was a strange smile, sad and proud at the same time. He said that Al was probably right. Then he asked Al a question in return. He asked if the scholar had anyone back home, anyone who would miss him if he never returned. Al thought of his family, his parents who had encouraged his studies, his sister who sent him messages every week, his mentor who had warned him that the galaxy was more dangerous than books suggested. He nodded. Cole told him to think about those people when he reached safety. Think about them and be grateful. Then he turned back to face the corridor. Amy was adjusting her weapon when Al approached her. She looked worse than before, pale and unsteady, her wound soaking through the bandages that someone had applied. She should not have been standing. She certainly should not have been preparing to fight. But she stood in line with her fellow humans, ready to do what needed to be done. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small data chip. She pressed it into Al's hand and closed his fingers around it. She told him that the chip contained messages for her family, recordings she had made during quiet moments on the station. If she did not survive, she wanted him to deliver them personally. She wanted her parents to know that she died protecting people. She wanted her brother to know that she was not afraid at the end. Al started to protest. He wanted to say that she would survive, that help would come, that this sacrifice was not necessary. But the words died in his throat. He looked at her face and saw the truth written there. She knew she was going to die. She had accepted it, and she was at peace. He promised to deliver the messages. His voice broke as he spoke, something that had never happened to him in his memory. Amy smiled and touched his face gently. She told him to run fast and live well. Then she turned to take her place in the line. The other humans were making their own preparations. They checked ammunition and shared what they had. They drank the last of their water. They told jokes that made no sense to Al, laughing at things that were not funny, finding comfort in sounds instead of meanings. The clicking began in the distance. It grew louder with each passing second, a wave of hunger approaching through the darkness. The had found them. Cole gave a single command. The humans raised their weapons. The civilians behind them scrambled toward the shuttles, helped by crew members who had emerged to assist with boarding. Al found himself being pushed toward safety, away from the people who were about to die for him. The first appeared at the end of the corridor, then more still. They filled the passage like water filling a pipe, climbing over each other in their eagerness to reach the prey beyond. The humans opened fire. The sound was enormous, a wall of noise that hurt Al's ears even from a distance. Fell in waves, their bodies piling up to create barriers that the creatures behind simply climbed over. The humans did not retreat. They did not flinch. They stood their ground and kept firing, kept killing, kept buying time with each shot. Al watched from the shuttle doorway as the battle unfolded. He saw a human named Lisa fall when it reached her, dragged down into a mass of claws and teeth. He saw a man named Greg Palmer step forward to take her place, filling the gap in the line. He saw Amy stumble from blood loss and then catch herself, raising her weapon again with hands that should not have had the strength. A broke through the line and charged toward the shuttles. Cole intercepted it, meeting the creature with nothing but a combat knife when his ammunition ran out. He killed it and took its claws across his chest. He staggered but did not fall. The shuttle doors began to close. Al pressed against the small window, watching as the corridor filled with more and more. The line of humans was crumbling now, reduced to 5, then 4, then 3. Amy fell and Cole dragged her behind a barrier. Greg continued firing alone until he disappeared under a wave of creatures. The shuttle lifted off. The window showed the bay growing smaller below, and then the station itself, and then nothing but stars. Al kept watching until there was nothing left to see. His hand still clutched the data chip that Amy had given him. His eyes still burned with tears that his people were not supposed to shed. The last transmission from the station came through the shuttle's speakers. Cole's voice, broken and fatting, spoke 2 words before the signal died. "Get them home." Al closed his eyes and made a promise. He would get home, he would deliver Amy's messages, and he would make sure the galaxy knew what humans had done this day. My first encounter with terror came while fighting beside Earth's warriors. Part 5. 3 months had passed since the fall of Harmony's Edge. 3 months since Al had watched humans die for strangers. 3 months since he had learned what courage truly meant. He stood now before the Galactic Assembly on Prime, preparing to share his testimony with representatives from 100 different worlds. He was not the same who had left for that research posting. His family had noticed the change immediately upon his return. He moved differently now, with awareness of his surroundings that bordered on paranoia. He slept poorly, haunted by clicking sounds that existed only in his memory. He had begun physical training, something no scholar had done in living memory. His colleagues found him disturbing. His friends found him distant. His mentor found him fascinating. The assembly hall was vast and ancient, filled with beings of every shape and size. They had gathered to hear about the attack, to understand what had happened, to decide how the coalition should respond. Al had been called as a witness, one of the few survivors who could speak about the events firsthand. He began with the facts. He described the station and its purpose. He explained how they had bypassed the warning systems. He detailed the breach and the initial casualties and the desperate flight through the corridors. The assembly listened in silence, their translators converting his words into dozens of languages. Then he reached the part of his testimony that he had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. He had to describe the humans. He told the assembly about Commander Cole and his endless preparations for disasters that others dismissed as impossible. He told them about Lieutenant Amy Dawson and her patient explanations of concepts that had no equivalent. He told them about Danny and Maria Santos and Jake, 3 young humans who had volunteered to die so that strangers might live. A representative from the Federation interrupted him. She wanted to know if the humans had been under orders to sacrifice themselves. Perhaps their commanders had threatened them with punishment if they failed to protect the civilians. Perhaps they had no choice in the matter. Al shook his head. He explained that he had been present when the decisions were made. No one had been ordered to stay behind. No one had been threatened or coerced. The humans had chosen their fate freely, knowing exactly what it would cost them. They had smiled as they made the choice. The assembly stirred at this. Some species nodded as if this confirmed what they already knew about humans. Others looked confused or skeptical. A few seemed frightened. Al continued his testimony. He described the final stand in the shuttle bay, 9 humans against an army of monsters. He described the way they had joked with each other while preparing to die. He described Amy giving him the data chip with messages for her family, accepting her death with a grace that still made his heart ache. He described Cole's final transmission, 2 words that carried the weight of everything humans believed in. "Get them home." He paused to compose himself. The assembly waited. Then Al said something that he had been thinking about for 3 months, words that had formed slowly in the darkness of sleepless nights. He told the assembly that he had encountered terror twice on Harmony's Edge. The first time was when he saw the creatures were horrifying, he admitted. They were nightmares given form, hunger without conscience, death without purpose. Anyone would be afraid of them. But after the initial shock, he found that his fear of the faded. They were predators following instinct, nothing more. He could understand them even as he fled from them. They were comprehensible in their monstrousness. The second time he encountered terror was when he watched the humans fight. The assembly grew very quiet. Al explained what he meant. Humans felt fear just as deeply as any other species. He had seen it in their faces, in their shaking hands, in the tears they shed for fallen friends. They were not fearless warriors from some legend. They were flesh and blood, capable of pain and grief and doubt. But they fought anyway. They suffered anyway. They died anyway, and this was what truly terrified him. They did not choose to be monsters. Their nature compelled them. But humans chose to stand in corridors and die for strangers. They calculated the cost of their sacrifice and paid it willingly. They looked at certain death and walked toward it rather than away. Al told the assembly that he had studied many species in his career. He had learned their customs and beliefs and philosophies, but he had never encountered anything like humans. They were beings who could feel everything and stop for nothing. They wept and they killed. They feared and they charged. They loved and they sacrificed. This contradiction was what made them terrifying. Not their weapons or their tactics or their physical abilities. Their willingness to break themselves for others. A murmur passed through the assembly. Before anyone could respond, an aide rushed into the hall with urgent news. A coalition rescue fleet had reached Harmony's edge. They had expected to find only bodies. Instead, they had found survivors. 7 humans had held the corridor for 9 hours. 9 hours of continuous fighting, of ammunition running out and being replaced with knives and fists and finally bare hands. When the rescue teams broke through, they found Cole and Amy and 5 others still breathing, surrounded by mountains of dead. The assembly erupted in chaos. Representatives shouted questions and demands. How was this possible? What kind of beings could survive such an ordeal? How had 9 become 7 instead of 0? Al stood silently in the middle of the storm, holding Amy's data chip in his hand. She was alive. Against all logic, against all probability, she had survived. He did not understand how. He was not sure he wanted to understand. A human ambassador approached him after the session ended. She asked if he was okay. Al admitted that he did not know. He asked her how the humans had survived when survival should have been impossible. The ambassador smiled with an expression he was learning to recognize. She said that humans were stubborn. They did not know how to give up. Sometimes this was a flaw. Sometimes it was a miracle. Usually it was both. 1 week later, Al traveled to Earth. He carried Amy's data chip with him, determined to return it in person even though she no longer needed someone else to deliver her final messages. He found her in a military hospital in a city called San, recovering from wounds that should have killed her 3 times over. She laughed when she saw him, a sound of pure joy that made nurses look up in surprise. Then she cried, reaching out to embrace him with arms covered in bandages and healing scars. He held her carefully, afraid of causing pain, but she pulled him closer and told him that pain did not matter anymore. They talked for hours. She told him about the 9 hours in the corridor, about the moments when she was sure she would die, about the strange peace she had found when she accepted her fate. He told her about his testimony to the assembly, about the changes in himself that he was still trying to understand. When it was time to leave, Amy asked him what he had learned from all of this. What would he take back to his people? What would he tell others about humans? Al thought carefully before answering. He said that he came to Harmony's edge to study humans as curiosities. He left understanding why the galaxy whispered about Earth's warriors. They had taught him what it meant to be prey. The humans had taught him what it meant to be brave. He paused and added one final thought. He knew now which lesson frightened him more. Amy smiled and squeezed his hand. She said that she hoped he never had to use that lesson, but she also hoped he would remember it if he did. Al promised that he would never forget, and he kept that promise for the rest of his long life, carrying the memory of terror and courage intertwined, carrying the story of humans who chose to stand when running would have been easier, carrying the knowledge that somewhere in the galaxy there were beings who would die for strangers and smile while doing it. This was his first encounter with terror. It would not be his last, but it was the one that changed everything, the one that taught him what it truly meant to be brave. And whenever darkness came, whenever fear threatened to freeze him in place, he remembered Amy's words about feeling scared and doing what needed to be done anyway. He remembered the humans, and he found the strength to move.